As a first time expecting mama, there's so many questions that we have around labor. How is it going to go and what should I expect? And these are totally normal thoughts because this is so new. I mean, this is our first time experiencing this. So, of course, we're going to have so many questions, and I know I did for sure. And if you're new here, I'm Naomi. I'm a first time mama and very fresh off of pregnancy. I'm 1 month postpartum, and I've had all these same questions around labor and what to expect and things like that. And like I said, I'm fresh off, so I have all the advice, all the tea, all the juicy details about what to expect when you are going into labor. Because again, this is such a different experience. It's new, and everybody's experience is different too. So I know that I love to hear everybody's perspective. So this is my perspective on what to expect when you go into labor, and we're going to go into all the juicy details. So let's get into it. The first thing that I want to start with is that labor does not happen like the movies. In the movies, they make it seem so dramatic and like it just happens all of a sudden. Oh my goodness, this woman's water broke everywhere and now she's being rushed to the hospital and boom, she has her baby. Well, that's not how it goes. Labor is normally it can be very slow and gradual and kind of build up. So it's not this thing that, boom, your water breaks, you go into labor and then you're rushed away to have your baby. That's not how it happens. And honestly, that's a breath of fresh air because that just seems really intimidating. Labor is typically pretty chill until, not chill in the sense of like contractions and things like that, because contractions can get intense, but it's chill in the sense of how it builds up. So, your water breaks or you start feeling contractions, like there's a build up to it. So it's not just something that you just are thrown into, and that can give you a lot of peace of mind because you will know when it's coming on, and then you can just prepare yourself and have some time to get that preparation done before you actually are in active labor. But again, it's a buildup. To add on to that, the next thing to expect when you go into labor is that your water breaking isn't always a big splash. And some women's water doesn't even break and they're in labor. Some women, their water doesn't break until they're actually pushing their baby out. And some women, they experience just a trickle, kind of like you're peeing on yourself. That's what happened in my case. I just peed on myself a little bit, but I was like, oh wait, no, that was definitely my water. And then a little more came out. It was probably like maybe a half a cup's worth of liquid that came out after that initial trickle. So it's not always like this big gush where water is everywhere and you're soaking wet. Now, in some cases there are, but there's 3 scenarios that you can expect. One, either to have that big splash, that big gush of fluid, which you definitely can. 2 is to have that trickle where it's just kind of like feels like you're peeing on yourself a little bit. And 3, 4, your water not to break at all until you push your baby out. And this is one that I definitely didn't know before being pregnant, was that women's water didn't always break. And so this is one that I definitely wanted to include in there because I know for me, I thought that the water had to break and that's what sent you into active labor and then, you had your baby. But no, you can have a trickle or it not break at all. And so that's something that a lot of mamas don't know, especially first time mamas. So that is definitely a big one to expect when you go into labor. If your water doesn't break, then you can still be in labor, like if you're experiencing contractions and you're dilating, and you could just have that little trickle and it may feel like you peed on yourself. The next thing to expect is that labor takes time, and especially for first time mamas, labor can take a little longer than mamas who have done this before. And early labor can last anywhere from a few hours to days. And I know in my case, my early labor lasted close to 48 hours. I need to calculate it, but it was close to 48 hours. I was in labor for a total of 60 hours. Yes, from the time my water broke to the time I had my baby, it was 60 hours. So, and I'm a first time mama. And so that's something that you definitely want to expect going into it, is that Labor takes time. Let it take its course. Your body knows what it's doing, but it's definitely not something where boom, you're in early labor, then boom, you're in active labor, then boom, you're pushing your baby out. Now, in some cases, some women do have very, very fast labors, like, only a few hours, like from the time that nothing was happening to the time where they went into labor and then boom, they're pushing their baby out. It happens. It definitely does. But as a first time mama, we have to go into it with the mentality that it takes time, and we have to know that so that we don't put extra pressure on ourselves or start feeling discouraged when things aren't going as quickly as maybe we thought they would. So definitely keep that in mind. And to add on to this, the next thing to expect is that labor can stall. So you can hit a point where, say, your water maybe trickled a little bit and then you're starting to feel contractions. And then you can get to a point to where your contractions just kind of fade away. And then you're like, okay, am I still in labor? Like, what's happening? My water broke a little bit. I started to feel some contractions, but now I'm not feeling any contractions. So labor can stall, and it can even get to a point to where even when you are getting closer to active labor, when you're feeling those contractions and you're like, okay, they're happening every 10 minutes. My contractions are happening every 10 minutes. They're now happening every 8 minutes. And then they get to 6 minutes and you're like, okay, they're closer and closer. And then boom, labor stalls, and then they go from every 6 minutes to maybe every 30 minutes. And you're like, what is happening? I went through this myself. I was up at night. My contractions were literally 10 minutes apart on the dot through the night. Because I went into, my water broke on a Wednesday around like 5:30, and then my contractions after that started at like 11. So I was up from like 11 to like 5 in the morning, literally. So 11 at night to 5 in the morning. And my contractions were like every 10 minutes, every 7 minutes. And then by the time it got to the morning time, I was like, okay, I've been laboring all night. Then they went to like every 30 minutes and every hour, and it just kind of spread apart again. So labor is like that. So this is definitely something to expect. And as a first time mama, again, don't get discouraged if you feel this happen, or don't get discouraged if this happens to you, because that's just how labor is. It can stall. The next thing to expect when you go into labor is that pain is more like pressure. Instead of it being very painful, like the contractions and things like that, it's really just an intensity that you can't really explain until you actually feel it for yourself. And honestly, it's not sharp pain. It's just a lot of pressure, and that can feel like pain, but it's really not. Like when you're in it, that pressure that you're feeling is just very uncomfortable, because obviously you haven't felt this before. Your body is going through a lot of changes. Your uterus is contracting to push your baby down and out. But honestly, that pressure or that pain is really more like pressure. So this is something to expect, because truthfully, I can't even say that during my labor process I felt pain, because I didn't. Just looking back, it was really just a lot of pressure and a lot of discomfort going through the contractions and things like that. Like, it definitely wasn't something that like didn't feel uncomfortable at all, but it was just a lot of pressure. So like even when your baby hits a certain point, when they're, about to enter your birth canal, you'll feel a lot of pressure on like your rectal area. And so you may feel like the need to like poop or something like that, because it's just a lot of pressure everywhere. So that's definitely something to expect, is that it's more pressure than it is pain, which can give you a lot of peace of mind, because it's not like just like a painful feeling like a lot of people think when it comes to birth, especially natural birth. If you're doing a natural birth, I did a natural birth myself. So unmedicated, no epidural, no medications whatsoever. So this definitely is different, and you can take my word for this that it's really not painful. It's just very uncomfortable. Yes, it is uncomfortable, but it's more so pressure than it is pain. The next thing to expect when you go into labor, and this kind of touches on one of the points that I made earlier, but I really just want to hone this in because this really plays a big part of like our mental going into labor is that it can take longer or shorter than we expect. And we truthfully never know how long it's going to take. Even if we've already had a baby before, every pregnancy is different, every labor and delivery is different. And so if you've already had a baby and say it took 20 hours, your next baby could take 18 hours, so less, or it could take more, maybe 24 hours or 30 hours. So it's just, there's no telling. And so we really have to go into labor and delivery with the mindset that it's going to take however long it takes. And we really can't place any expectations on that because we can't force ourselves to just push and have our baby in a certain amount of time. We really can't force it because labor is a process and it just has to take its course, like I was mentioning earlier. So we have to go into labor with no expectations of the time length. I truthfully, when I was going into labor, I really didn't think that it would take me 60 hours from the time my water broke to the time I pushed my baby out. But honestly, in the process, I wasn't tripping because I didn't go into it with any expectations of how long it was going to take. I didn't tell myself like, oh, I'm going to have my baby out in 12 hours or, oh, I'm going to have my baby out in a few hours. Like, I didn't put those expectations on it. And I'm glad I didn't, because had I done that, my mentality would have just been completely messed up. And we need our mind to be so clear and at peace when it comes to labor, because that is everything when it comes to us having a smooth birthing process. And so not having these expectations will help us so much. And something that I like to go by is that when you don't have expectations, you cannot be disappointed and you cannot be let down. So when it comes to your labor length, if you don't set expectations for it, you cannot be let down. So your mindset will be totally fine going into it and just allowing your body to take the time it needs to push your baby out, because it's going to take its perfect timing, literally. So just keep that in mind. So these are all things that you can expect going into labor. These are definitely the top ones that I took away from going into labor myself, the top ones that I'm like, oh yeah, these were definitely things to expect going into labor, especially for us first-time mamas. This video is really for us first-time mamas. If there is anything that you may be expecting going into labor that I didn't mention here, make sure that you place it in the comments below. And if you're not already, make sure you subscribe. And I wish you the best on your pregnancy journey and your upcoming labor and delivery.